So in today's video, I really want to go over just a few exercises and some common errors that you might be making, or some things to think about to make your exercise even more effective. So we've talked about this before. When we're doing our exercises, if we can be in a really good posture and we're using the right muscles, then we're obviously going to get stronger where we want to get stronger, and we're not going to be reinforcing bad patterns. However, it is common, if you're spending a lot of time, for example, sitting at the desk or sitting, to get a postural imbalance. So what a postural imbalance commonly presents like is a little bit round-shouldered, so tight through the pec muscles, a little bit forward chin, so tight through the muscles in the back of the neck and weak at the front of the neck, and because the shoulders are rounded, quite weak through those muscles in the back. So that then when you come to do your exercises in Pilates, these tight overactive muscles, they want to do the work because it's easier for your body, because that's what's used to activating. And those weaker muscles, like those muscles down in between your shoulder blades, they're stretched and a little bit lazy, and they don't really want to work. So unless we consciously know how to turn them on, what we could be doing is just strengthening accidentally, if you like, the muscles that are already too overactive, and then not working on the ones that we actually want to. So I'm just going to go over a few exercises today just to highlight common errors that might happen and how we can undo those and make sure that we're getting the right muscles working. So the first one I'm going to look at is called chariot pulls, and it's a really common exercise. Lots of us are doing it every time we come in, and it really is designed for our posture, so it's a really good one for us to start off with. So if we think about what I just said about those pec muscles being tight and the muscles down the middle of the back being weak, that's what we're trying to undo with this exercise. So chariot pulls looks like this. We're kneeling up on our carriage, and we don't have to be in high kneel, we can be in low kneel. So if you're doing this exercise up here and you're really wobbly and you're so busy concentrating on not falling that you're not able to make your corrections up here, you're actually better off going down into a low kneel and doing the exercise down here, because you're more stable and you can concentrate on the area that we're actually trying to work on, which really is the mid-back. So I'll do it down here just so you can see me to start. With our chariot pulls, usually we use the short straps, but again, you can adjust the exercise to suit yourself. And this is the most absolute best thing about Pilates, is that every exercise has got easier versions, harder versions, adaptations, so that you can make the program yours. Even if you're in a generic fitness class where everyone's doing the same thing, you can make it easier or harder to suit yourself depending on the level that you're at. So for example, with chariot pulls, just quickly as an aside, you might be down here in low kneel on long straps so that you're only doing a tiny little movement. Or you might be right up here in high kneel on your short straps, or even coming off the pads, which makes it even less stable, and you might be doing your exercise up here. So exact same exercise, teachers instructing the class, same cues and everything, but just by altering the position that you're doing it in, it can make a huge difference. Traditionally, this is taught as a starting point with your knees against the pads and up in kneeling. So the first thing that we want to look at here is that we've got a nice stable base. So the more narrow your legs, the harder it's going to be. The wider the legs, the easier it's going to be, because you've got a more stable base. So if you're just starting off, you can get your legs and pushing them right up on the outer part of the knee pad and having the feet together, so you've got like a triangular base or a tripod base. That'll be nice and stable. Squeezing the legs together, the feet together, makes it more stable. Feet apart, obviously less stable. So again, you can choose your battle. Now, when we're starting, before we even start pulling with our arms, we want to go back to that body scan and our posture. We do not want to be doing this exercise with a really arched back. So the first thing we want to do here is tucking our tail under, and we really want to exaggerate that and actually turn our glutes on. So we want a stable base through our pelvis, because what we're actually trying to work is those mid-back muscles, our postural muscles. We're not trying to work through our hips through this area. So we want that to be all turned on and nice and stable, activated the whole time. So if we're starting with our knees against the pads, feet might be together, up to you. We're tucking our tail under, turning our glutes on so our base is nice and stable. We're going to grab onto our straps. So in this case, we'll hold the short straps. And we're just going to start by bringing those shoulders down and back. So we don't want to start with our shoulders rounded or in that forward position. So we're in a beautiful posture before we even start. Now the exercise is always preset, so T-zone turned on, pelvic floor and core, working with our breath. So as we breathe out, we're very gently bringing those arms back and then slowly bringing them forward. Common mistakes that we see. As the arms come back, people will arch through their body. So we're getting an arching through the back, and we don't want to see that, because when we arch the back, there's compression through the spine and that can lead to pain. So remember, we can fix that by tucking our tail under and turning our glutes on. So as the arms come back, the pelvis shouldn't be moving at all. The next common mistake we see, and I'll show you from the front, is as people pull their arms back, they're kind of doing this. So if you think about the position of your hands, if you're holding the straps like this with your palms facing towards the back, automatically you're going to be more likely to want to internally rotate your arms. That could be because you've got tight lats, or it could be because you've got tight pecs, which is common with poor posture, which a lot of us, we're all sitting, we're living in this, on our phones, this world of flexion. A lot of us have got that common muscle imbalance. So when you're doing this exercise, we want you to start with your hands in neutral. So your thumbs are pointing towards the front of the carriage and your palms are facing each other. That's how we're going to hold on to the straps. Then as you pull your straps back, we're going to try to open the shoulders without arching the back. So we're keeping the tail tucked under and pinching the shoulder blades together. So that's very different from this action. So if you're doing this action where you're bringing these shoulders in and hunching up through the neck, you're just going to give yourself either, at best, reinforce a poor pattern, at worst, neck pain and possibly even a headache. So really important. It seems like such a simple, easy exercise, but it's actually hard to do it really well. So I'm just going to go over that again. So we're in our start position. We've got our knees up against the shoulder pads. We're setting out our lumbar spine, so we're tucking our tail under, squeezing our glutes. We're going to hold our straps so that our thumbs are facing forward and our palms are facing each other. So we're not holding our straps like this, which we commonly see. So that's the first thing that I really want you to check on. So making sure that those palms are facing each other. Making sure the tail stays tucked under, the glutes are turned on, and then as we come back, we're opening the shoulders, pinching down between the middle of the back and not letting the back arch. So if I can show you from the back, as the arms come back, tails tucked under, glutes are turned on, we're getting that pinching through the mid-back. And then if we look at it from the front, this is our arm position. Tails tucked under, glutes are turned on, palms are facing. We pull those arms back and we're opening. So we should feel a nice stretch through the front and a pinching through the mid-back muscles. And then that's chariot pulls. And there's lots of different exercises we could do in this position, but that's sort of the basic starting one in that position. So if you get that right, then you can use those principles to go on to other exercises. Okay, the next one I want to have a look at is reverse pulls, but this is relevant for any time that you're in 4-point kneel. So with reverse pulls, I'll just put the screen down. We want to be on our hands and knees, and we're holding in this position. So anytime we're on our hands and knees or even lying on the box, again, we want to make sure we're in neutral spine. So number one thing we don't want to see is this lordosis or this arching of the spine. So we're going to draw that belly button to spine. Think about connecting the ribs and hips at the front. So if you think about the bottom of your ribs and the top of your hips, we want to think about narrowing that space, and that's going to stop us from arching the spine by using our tummy muscles, which is exactly what we're trying to achieve. So as soon as you go up into 4-point kneel, if you feel yourself dipping like that, you can think about belly button to spine, you can think about flattening your back, but the cue I like the most is drawing your hips and your ribs together. So you can think about drawing your ribs up to your hips up to your ribs is probably the easiest way to do it. Now in this position we are going to have our shoulders, our hands a little forward of our shoulders. Sometimes when we're on hands and knees we want them directly underneath. So that just depends on what the exercise is and what the instructor's teaching you. But so far we've got our nice, we're staying at 90 degrees in the hip here, we've got our nice flat back, and then the exercise here is after we've activated our pelvic floor and our core, we're going to breathe out, pull through our arms and draw our body up. So this is reverse pull arms, so all that's working is the arms. So what I see here as people fatigue is they start to come down and they're using the legs. So you're starting to see movement through. Now this is an exercise in itself, reverse pull legs, but you've got to make sure you're doing what you think you're doing. So if you're doing it as an arm exercise, all that should be moving is that angle at the shoulder. Nothing else should be moving. So we shouldn't be getting this little movement towards the end, which we often see. And then the last thing that you need to be really careful of in this position is your neck. So I'll go into the position that we often see. So we've already corrected this. We know we're going to connect our rib with our hips at the front, but we often see this kind of thing where we've got this chin out and the neck is all squashed. So we're always wanting to think long neck. So imagine you've got that puppet string. In this case, it's pulling you to the side wall. So we're always thinking about extending, lengthening, elongating through the neck and keeping that neck nice and long so it's not getting squashed and it's not going to lead to neck pain and headaches. So if you've got your neck long, your lumbar spine's in a good position, your shoulders are down and back, then you're going to get the right muscles working. And that's what it's all about. That's what we're trying to achieve, is isolating and getting the correct muscles working and not reinforcing those bad patterns. Another really good thing you can think of whilst you're doing all your exercises, I call it the Pilates box or the Pilates square. So if you think about your shoulders and your hips, and we start to draw some lines. So if we go across from one shoulder to the next, down to our hip, across to the other hip, and then back up to the shoulder, we're drawing like a rectangle, I suppose, and it's nice 90-degree angles. So we want to maintain those 90-degree angles throughout our exercises. So we don't want to be getting, uneven or rotated. We want to keep that core nice and strong and nice and symmetrical. Okay, so we've gone over our chariot pulls and our reverse pulls, our reverse arms. The next one I'm going to look at is side arms. So this is actually a really difficult exercise to do, and you might need to go down to a lower weight than what you think you need. And again, whenever you're doing your kneeling exercises on the Reforma, you can always go into low kneel, which is a lot more supportive, a lot easier, or you can come up into high kneel, which is then going to make you work through your glutes and your pelvis a lot more, but it's going to be a lot more unstable. So you've got to work harder to make sure that you've got a stable base so that you can do your exercise correctly. If you can't do your exercise correctly with the unstable base, then go down, wait till you get nice and strong with the actual exercise, and then you can add that on later on as a progression. So with your side arms, the first one we're just going to look at is doing a little external rotation. So I'm just going to do it down here so you can see me nicely. And all I'm doing here is just rotating my arm in and out. So it's really lovely for your rotator cuff, for shoulder strength. Remember, the shoulders have got a lot of little muscles that are supporting and stabilizing them, so we don't need a high load with this. But what we don't want to see with this exercise is this kind of thing happening. So if we think about our Pilates square or our Pilates rectangle, we're trying to keep those right angles. So we're just using the arm. We're not getting any movement through the trunk. And also the other thing here is that we don't want to be taking the arm sort of away from the body. Another common mistake we see here is people actually just go into bending and straightening the elbow because it's a lot easy rather than maintaining that elbow at 90 degrees. So if we can just recap, we're nice and square, we're not in any side flexion here, we're keeping the Pilates box turned on, our elbows at 90 degrees, nicely tucked into the body, and it's just a tiny rotation. And again, all that's moving is that arm rotating in and out, not bending and straightening the elbow, not putting any strain through the wrist, not hunching up through the shoulder. So that's just another example of it's a very isolated exercise, and a lot of times people want to put more weight on before they're ready, and it just ends up in some sort of exercise that's not working what we're trying to work. Now, of course, there are exercises like this one where we are actually deliberately going off into side flexion, and that's fine, like that's what the exercise is. So in terms of your Pilates box, that's only relevant if you're trying to keep your trunk nice and stable, because that's what the exercise is. So always follow your instructor's cues and they'll let you know whether you're on the right track or not. Okay, we've got two more that I'm going to go over, and the next one I'm going to look at, again, it's a really common exercise, and that's standing legs. So you will have definitely done this in one of your classes where you're standing up on the carriage. So sorry you can't see my face, but you can see what we're working on, which is the lower half, so that's good. Now, if I just stand side on to show you here, as soon as people stand up and start pushing, especially if their load is too high, as they're pushing their leg away, we often see this. So I know I've talked about the lumbar position a lot, but it's really important with this exercise to make sure your tail stays tucked under. And then as you're pushing that carriage out, that it stays tucked under. So as you're pushing out, we don't want to let that go. So again, this is where I like to cue ribs to hips. And in this position, it makes more sense to bring your ribs to your hips, whereas when we were on our 4-point kneel, it kind of feels better to bring hips to ribs. So it doesn't matter whichever way feels best for you, but thinking about bringing that together, and that will flatten out your lower back. Also, we want to turn our glutes on so that we're not letting that back fall into lumbar, to a lumbar lordosis, and of course we're working those deep tummy muscles. So for example, with this one, as we're pushing in and out, we want to be feeling it on the outside of the legs. Another common thing, if you're not feeling it on the outside of the leg, is it could be your foot position. And we haven't talked about foot position yet, but it's really common for people when they push out to really let their foot roll in, and we don't want that to happen. So as you're pushing out, I want you to imagine you've got a little orthotic in under your foot, in under the arch, and you're actually lifting up through the arch of your foot. So physically getting a little bit of an increase in your arch and trying to maintain that as you're pushing out into abduction. And then of course, as you're coming back in as well. Okay, so last exercise we're going to look at is our side lying. So this is a hard exercise to do. We're usually doing leg work in this position, but it's really important to get the setup correct. So if you're lying down on your side, I love to use a pillow or a little ball, just so you've got some support. So you can always grab your little ball, and I'm just going to go over in this position the setup. So if we lie on our side, often in class, you're trying to get in position really quick and get to your exercise and get started, but sometimes you do just need to take a tiny moment to make sure you've got your setup correct so that what you're doing is more effective. So as we lie on our side, we've got our little support under our head there so that we're not letting our head hang down into a lot of side flexion. So that's the number one thing. The number two thing we want to look at is our alignment. So if you think about the top shoulder, it should be directly over the bottom shoulder, and likewise with the hip. The hip should be over the bottom hip. So what we don't want is that your half kind of almost half on your side, half on your back, or likewise half on your side, kind of half on your tummy. So we call this stacking the shoulders and stacking the hips, and it means that they're directly on top of one another. So that's the next thing that's really, really important. Now, the other thing that people tend to do here is really collapse in through their waist. So a common exercise here is to put your foot in strap, and you might be just taking that leg in and out, or doing leg lifts, or whatever the exercise is that your instructor's teaching you. But what we want to see is that we're not collapsing through here. We actually want to keep that hip pressing away. So in this instance, we're thinking about pressing the hip away from the rib and actually getting a little bit of a gap through here, so we're not collapsing in. So it's kind of the opposite to what we've cued in other exercises, which is why this one can be a little bit tricky. So we actually want to feel the gap under the waistline in this exercise, unlike hundreds, where we don't want to feel a big gap, or any of those ones where you're lying on your back when your legs are up in the air. So we'll just recap all of those. So when you're lying on your side, we want a pillow or a ball under the head so the neck's in neutral. We want to make sure our shoulders and our hips are stacked, so we're not half forward or half back. So we're in a beautiful position, and we want to make sure that we're getting that little bit of a lift through here, and we get that by pressing that hip away. And then as we're doing our exercise, that hip stays pressed away. So as that leg comes back, we're not crunching down, we're holding that little gap, holding that hip away, maintaining that position through the trunk. So again, if we think about our Pilates rectangle, those 90-degree angles are getting maintained. As we're working, in this case, our leg, we should be feeling it in our leg muscles and in our glutes, definitely not through our back. So that's a tricky one to get set up in, and sometimes, like I say, you just got to take that tiny moment just to make sure you've got a really great setup so that you're getting the most out of your exercise. So they're just a few that I thought we'd go over today. Just as you coming into class, it gives you a little bit of an idea of what you should be focusing on so that you can take responsibility for your own exercises and make sure that you're getting the absolute most out of what you're doing here at Loft Pilates.